to Tallha Abdulrazaq, who's in England. He's a counter-terrorism and security expert. He's also a researcher at the University of Exeter's Strategy and Security Institute. Tallha, thank you so much for your time. Rasmus Paludan has already held up a caricature of the Prophet Muhammad. He has now burnt a copy of the Quran. I mean, to explain it almost in the least exaggerated way as possible, he's literally playing with fire.
Absolutely. And the best way to kind of look at this is to understand that he's not the first person in history to do this, to offend Muslim sensibilities, to try to attract the ire of the Islamic world. This has been going on actually for more than 1,000 years. Whenever there's an enemy of Islam, an enemy of Muslims, someone who harbors extreme hatred towards Muslims, they've always engaged in these activities. And guess what? They're all gone. They're all in the trash heap of history. Islam is still thriving. It's the fastest growing religion in the world. And there's a reason for that. So I'm not too concerned about what this person is trying to do. At the end of the day, we have to look at who he is. I mean, who is this who is trying to educate us on freedom of expression and freedom of speech? In 2013, he was accused of, he had actually a restraining order put out against him for stalking people, a young man at that time at the age of 23. In 2021, a Danish court found him guilty of racism and disseminating hate speech and of defaming people, and he was given a suspended sentence. Also in 2021, the Danish newspaper Ekstra Bladet published an investigation into him where he was using a chat server to talk about sexual relations with young boys. So this guy who has expressed tendencies for pedophilia and all sorts of other horrendous points of view and defends them is now trying to educate us on freedom of expression and freedom of speech. And to do so, he's seeking to burn the Quran. You know, it's almost, it would be funny if it wasn't so ridiculous, let's put it that way.
Tallha, he has been banned from France and Belgium in the past, indeed banned from entering Sweden. He's a dual national. His parents, one from Denmark, one from Sweden. He's done this before in Sweden last year. Why would the authorities in Stockholm allow him to go ahead with this latest act?
Well, obviously, just the thing is, everyone's kind of, with the whole war in Ukraine, you saw these countries on the periphery who are close to the Russian border suddenly panic. Understandably so. Their first gut instinct was to make applications for NATO membership. Now, while that does make sense, obviously, they have to bear in mind that Turkey, a Muslim nation, is one of the key countries that form the NATO alliance. They have the second largest military in NATO. In other words, Sweden and other countries are asking Turkey to step in militarily should they be attacked. So that's quite a tall order. If you think about it, they want Turkey to step in to defend them, to literally lay their lives on the line to defend them and their freedom. But at the same time, they're not willing to reciprocate in terms of respecting Turkey's security needs, respecting Turkey as a nation. And it's not just respecting Turkey, it's respecting Muslims as a whole. You don't go around insulting people's most cherished and sacred beliefs. It doesn't mean that there's no freedom of speech. It means that freedom of speech has to be curtailed by reason. Even they have their sacred idols. For example, when the Danish cartoonist who first started off the whole insulting caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, when he died and a few people, including myself, expressed satisfaction that, such a hateful person was now gone from this world, I remember the sheer vitriol that came my way. Well, how can you say that about a human that's just died? How can you say that about someone who's part of the human race and needs to be respected? Well, if he is entitled to be respected, then he should also show that respect to other people. It's a two-way street. You cannot sit there and offend and insult Muslims and go after them purely because, and you use the excuse of freedom of speech. The reality is they're punching down. They're not punching up. They're not speaking truth to power, none of that kind of stuff. But only when it's Muslims is it deemed freedom of expression and freedom of speech. Why? Because, and frankly, the Muslim community across Europe and in fact across the world is largely to blame for this because they sit back and they allow it to happen as a kind of a marginalized community. They don't stand up for themselves. If we look at the inverse of that, there's so much that the Muslim community can learn from the Jewish community, who rightly, very rightly, if someone starts to deny the Holocaust or starts to defame them, they ensure that they band together, they stand together, and they do not allow that person to simply run roughshod over them. And there are lessons there for the Muslim community as to how they should also be defending themselves.
Tallha, do actions like Rasmus Paludan's place Muslims in increased danger?
Yes, especially if it's state-sponsored. I mean, this came from the very top of the Swedish government. They signed off on his protest. They knew exactly what he was going to do. It's not a surprise to them. They've banned him before, as you said. Other countries have banned him. Denmark has found him guilty of hate crimes. They know exactly who he is and what he's going to do. So by facilitating this, by saying, okay, then we're going to give you the nod, we're going to allow you to go outside the Turkish embassy, we're going to allow you to burn the Islamic holy book, knowing that he's done so before, knowing that it triggered violent protests, all of that indicates that they do not care what happens socially to their own Muslim citizens. There's always this thing about, yes, in a democracy, everyone is equal, but some people seem to be more equal than others. If Muslims express dissatisfaction at this, why can't you take a joke? Why does this get to you? Sure, if you say something about us, we don't mind. The reality, as we know, is if you do say something about them, they go after you, they try to cancel you, they try to destroy you, and sometimes, rightly so. It depends on, Muslims aren't incapable of saying offensive things, and therefore they should be held to account when they do. But equally, as I said earlier, it's a two-way street. That respect must go both ways. If it doesn't, it will only lead to violence, and the fact that it's being sanctioned from the very top of the Swedish government means that they are essentially giving green light to all the racists in their country. It's fine to go and target Muslims, go after them, burn their holy books, insult them, and you know what? Maybe we'll turn a blind eye to violence too.
Yeah, and that would be obviously the overt demonstration of people's feelings who might be encouraged by the acts that Paludan is undertaking right now in Stockholm. But then you've got the less obvious. In other words, you've got those right-wing politicians in Europe, and I don't actually want to mention any names, but we can guess, who used to be extremely anti-migrant, extremely anti-Muslim, and have tempered their public personas to make themselves more electable. But then they'll be watching this and thinking, well, how much more can I push?
Well, absolutely. And these things don't change overnight. And even if we look at Nazi Germany, for example, and the way they kind of twisted their society to start hating the Jewish people, the same thing is happening over a period of decades towards Muslims. And Rasmus Paludan has openly advocated for the extermination of Muslims. He said that he wants to see a world where there's not a single Muslim left on the planet. That is a genocidal statement. There's no two ways about it. How this man is walking free is beyond me, especially as they claim to be, rule of law, justice, equality, all of the nice buzzwords that we like to hear coming out of the democratic West. Apparently, they only apply in certain cases, not towards Muslims and not towards their feelings. And therefore, when you've got right-wing politicians becoming emboldened like this, they will continue to push that rhetoric. They will radicalize their own populations. They will encourage them to other Muslims. They're not Swedes, are they? They're not really Swedes. They're not really Danes. They're not really Germans. They're not really British. They'll always have their loyalties elsewhere. It actually mirrors a lot of the anti-Semitic tropes that are used by neo-Nazis. And therefore, if we can't learn lessons from the past, if we can't look at what happened in Europe not that long ago and think, never again should actually mean something, then unfortunately we are doomed to repeat the same mistakes of the past. And that will be a tragic consequence for everyone.
And, excuse me, Tallha, I've just been told we've run out of time, but really, you know what, we always appreciate your analyses on TRT World every time. Tallha Abdulrazaq, thanks a lot.